10 years after Elijah's breakthrough exhibition, Marcus Reeves stood at the podium of a national justice reform conference, addressing a room filled with judges, lawyers, activists, and those who had been wrongfully convicted and later exonerated. At 64, his hair had turned completely gray, but his eyes remained sharp and clear, reflecting the wisdom earned through decades of both suffering and purpose. When I was released from prison after serving 3 years for a crime I didn't commit, I carried anger like a second skin, Marcus began, his voice steady and resonant. I believed that anger would protect me, define me, fuel me. What I didn't understand then was that holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. The audience sat in rapt attention as Marcus continued, sharing the unlikely story of how stopping to help 2 stranded children had reconnected him with the very judge who had sentenced him. Our foundation has now helped overturn 73 wrongful convictions, Marcus explained. We've established community support systems in 27 states to help exonerees rebuild their lives. And perhaps most importantly, we've worked with judicial education programs to help judges recognize and address the systemic biases and pressures that can lead to wrongful convictions in the first place. From his seat in the front row, retired Judge Daniel Harrington listened with pride and humility. At 72, he had dedicated the latter part of his career and retirement to reforming the system he had once served without question. The foundation he and Marcus had built together had become a national model for restorative justice initiatives. But the most profound lesson I've learned, Marcus continued, is that justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms. It's about what happens in our hearts and communities afterward. It's about creating systems that can acknowledge harm, make amends, and build something better from the broken pieces. As Marcus concluded his speech to thunderous applause, he caught Judge Harrington's eye. The older man nodded slightly, a gesture that contained a decade of shared work, mutual respect, and an unlikely friendship forged in the crucible of injustice and redemption. Later that evening, a small celebration gathered in a private dining room at the conference hotel. Elijah, now a renowned artist whose work exploring themes of justice and human connection hung in major museums around the world, had flown in to surprise his father. The Harrington twins, Emma and Lily, both successful in their own rights, Emma as a civil rights attorney and Lily as a child psychologist, flanked their father protectively, a habit they had never outgrown. "To Dad," Elijah said, raising his glass toward Marcus. "Who taught me that our greatest strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." "And to my father," Emma added, turning toward Judge Harrington, who had the courage to acknowledge his mistakes and spend the rest of his life working to correct them. As dinner progressed, the conversation turned to the Foundation's newest initiative, a healing center that would bring together exonerees and judges who had presided over wrongful convictions for facilitated dialogue and reconciliation. "It's ambitious," Judge Harrington admitted. "Many judges will resist participating, fearing liability or damage to their reputations. And many exonerees will question whether such dialogue can ever truly address the harm they've suffered," Marcus added. "But we have to start somewhere. Our story proves that healing is possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances." Lily, who had helped design the psychological support components of the program, nodded thoughtfully. "The key is ensuring that participation is truly voluntary on both sides, and that the process centers the needs and experiences of those who were wrongfully convicted." As they discussed the practical and ethical challenges of the initiative, Marcus was struck by how far they had all come, not just in their professional accomplishments, but in their capacity to hold complexity, to see beyond binary notions of guilt and innocence to the messy, human reality beneath. After dinner, Marcus and Judge Harrington found themselves alone on the hotel balcony, looking out over the city lights. Despite the years of working together, moments of private conversation between them remained charged with the weight of their shared history. "I received some news yesterday," Judge Harrington said quietly. "The cancer has returned. The doctors are less optimistic this time." Marcus turned to study his friend's face, seeing the resignation there. "I'm sorry, Daniel." "How long?" "A year, perhaps less." The judge smiled faintly. Enough time to put my affairs in order, to say proper goodbyes. They stood in silence for a moment, the night air cool against their faces. I've been thinking about legacy, Judge Harrington continued. About what we leave behind when we're gone. For most of my career, I believed my legacy would be in my legal decisions, my contributions to jurisprudence. Now I know better. The foundation will continue, Marcus assured him. We've built something that will outlast both of us. It's not just the foundation, the judge replied. It's the ripple effects of our choices, both the harmful ones and the healing ones. It's Emma and Lily, and how they've chosen to use their talents to serve others. It's Elijah and his art that challenges people to see beyond their preconceptions. And it's you, Marcus, your extraordinary capacity for transformation that has inspired so many others. Marcus shook his head slightly. We built this together. Your willingness to face what happened, to make amends, that took its own kind of courage. Judge Harrington turned to face him directly. There's something I need to ask you. Something I've never had the courage to ask before. What is it? Do you forgive me? The question hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Marcus considered the man before him, no longer the imposing figure in judicial robes who had altered the course of his life, but an aging, imperfect human being seeking peace before his final journey. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Marcus said finally. It's a process, a choice I've had to make again and again over the years. There were days I couldn't do it, when the memory of what I lost was too painful. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But yes, Daniel. I forgive you. Not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to resentment would have prevented me from becoming who I needed to be. The judge's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, he whispered. That means more than you know. As they stood together in the gathering darkness, Marcus reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them to this moment, from adversaries to reluctant allies to partners in a shared mission, and finally, to something like friends. When I'm gone, Judge Harrington said after a while, the foundation will need strong leadership to continue its work. Marcus nodded. Emma has already expressed interest in taking a more active role. And there are several exonerees on the board who bring invaluable perspective. And you? Will you stay on? As long as I'm able, Marcus promised. This work has become my purpose. My way of making meaning from what happened. The judge smiled, a mixture of sadness and peace in his expression. Then I can go knowing that what we've built together will continue to grow and evolve. That the harm I caused has, in some small way, been transformed into healing for others. 8 months later, Marcus stood beside Emma and Lily as they scattered their father's ashes in the mountain meadow he had loved. Judge Daniel Harrington had faced his final days with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his later years, using his remaining time to strengthen the foundation's work and deepen his relationships with those he loved. In his final weeks, he had completed a memoir detailing his journey from traditional notions of justice to a deeper understanding of restoration and healing. The manuscript, which he had asked Marcus to review before publication, was unflinching in its acknowledgement of his role in Marcus's wrongful conviction and honest about the profound impact that reconnection had on his life and work. As the small group of mourners made their way back down the mountain trail, Elijah fell into step beside his father. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded, his eyes on the path ahead. "I'm thinking about how life rarely follows the path we expect. How sometimes our greatest wounds become doorways to unexpected purpose." Elijah considered this. "In my first year of art school, a professor told me that the Japanese practice kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, teaches us that our breaks and mending become part of our beauty, not something to hide." He glanced at his father. "You and Judge Harrington were like that. The break between you was real, but what you built in mending it became something beautiful." That evening, the extended family they had formed gathered at Marcus's home for dinner, Elijah and his partner, the Harrington twins and their families, and several board members from the foundation. As they shared memories of Judge Harrington, the conversation naturally turned to the future of their work together. Dad left specific instructions for the foundation, Emma explained, unfolding a letter. He wanted us to expand the reconciliation program, to create more opportunities for dialogue between those who have been harmed by the system and those who work within it. He also left a significant portion of his estate to establish a scholarship fund for children of incarcerated parents, Lily added. He believed that breaking the cycle of harm requires investing in the next generation. As Marcus listened to the plans and possibilities, he felt a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. The man who had once embodied the system's failure had, in the end, become one of its most dedicated reformers. "There's one more thing," Emma said, turning to Marcus. "Dad asked that you be named the Foundation's executive director. He believed no one else could better represent its mission and values." Marcus sat back, surprised. "I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. I don't have the legal background or—" "You have something more valuable," Lily interrupted gently. "You have the lived experience and the moral authority to speak truth to power." Dad was very clear about this. He believed your leadership would ensure the Foundation never loses sight of the human beings at the center of its work. After a moment of reflection, Marcus nodded. "Then I accept, with gratitude and humility." 2 years later, Marcus stood in the newly completed Harrington Center for Restorative Justice, watching as the first group of exonerees and judges gathered for a facilitated dialogue session. The center, built with funds from Judge Harrington's estate and donations from supporters across the country, represented the culmination of their shared vision, a place where harm could be acknowledged, where healing could begin, and where the system might learn from its most profound failures. The main hall featured a permanent exhibition of Elijah's artwork, including a specially commissioned piece that depicted the journey from injustice to restoration. At the center of the painting was a simple image, two hands reaching across a divide, fingertips almost touching, an echo of the painting Elijah had created as a boy. As Marcus welcomed the participants, he saw in their faces the same emotions he had experienced years ago: anger, fear, hope, uncertainty. He knew that not every story would end like his and Judge Harrington's. Some wounds were too deep, some harms too severe for neat resolution. But he believed in the power of bearing witness, of speaking truth, of creating space for whatever healing might be possible. "We gather today not to erase what happened," Marcus told the group, "but to acknowledge it fully, to learn from it, and perhaps, to find a way forward that honors both the harm that was done and our shared humanity." This center exists because two unlikely allies, a wrongfully convicted man and the judge who sentenced him, discovered that justice is not just about what happens in courtrooms, but about what we build together afterward. As the dialogue began, Marcus stepped back, allowing the facilitators to guide the process. From the back of the room, he watched as people who had been on opposite sides of the justice system began the difficult, necessary work of truly seeing one another. Later that evening, as Marcus locked up the center, he paused before Elijah's painting. In the quiet of the empty building, he could almost feel Judge Harrington's presence, not as the imposing figure who had once held his fate in his hands, but as the flawed, courageous man who had become his unlikely partner in transformation. "We did it, Daniel," Marcus said softly to the empty room. "We built something that matters." On the 20th anniversary of that rainy night when Marcus had stopped to help two stranded children, a special ceremony was held at the Harrington Center. The foundation had now helped overturn more than 200 wrongful convictions and established support programs in all 50 states. The reconciliation model they had pioneered had been adopted by justice systems around the world. Marcus, now in his 70s but still active in the foundation's work, watched with pride as Emma Harrington, who had succeeded him as executive director 5 years earlier, unveiled a new initiative, the Marcus Reeves Fellowship Program, which would provide education and leadership training for formerly incarcerated individuals interested in criminal justice reform. "My father often said that his greatest regret was the harm he caused through his participation in an unjust system," Emma told the gathered crowd. But he also believed that his greatest blessing was the opportunity to work alongside Marcus Reeves to transform that harm into healing for others. This fellowship program honors the extraordinary journey these two men took together and ensures that their legacy will continue for generations to come. As applause filled the room, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Elijah beside him, now a distinguished artist in his mid-40s whose work on justice themes had influenced a generation of creators. "Dad," Elijah said quietly, "I've been commissioned to create a permanent installation for the National Museum of Justice Reform. They want me to tell your story, yours and Judge Harrington's, as a centerpiece for their exhibition on restorative approaches." Marcus smiled, thinking of how far they had come from that small apartment where he had once struggled to provide his son with art supplies. "Our story is just one of many," he said. "There are thousands of others who have never received justice or recognition." "I know," Elijah nodded. "That's why this matters. Your story shows what's possible when we move beyond punishment toward healing. It gives people hope that a different kind of justice exists." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus found a quiet moment to slip outside. The evening air was cool, with a hint of rain in the distance, not unlike that night 20 years ago when he had pulled over to help two little girls stranded at a bus stop. He thought about the strange, winding path his life had taken, from wrongful conviction to unexpected redemption, from bitter adversaries to unlikely allies, from personal healing to systemic change. None of it had been easy. The injustice he had suffered could never be truly erased, the years lost never fully recovered. But in the alchemical process of transforming his pain into purpose, he had discovered something profound about the human capacity for growth and connection. As he stood there under the gathering clouds, Marcus imagined Judge Harrington standing beside him, as he had so many times during their years of work together. He could almost hear the judge's voice, "We didn't just build a foundation, Marcus. We built a different way of understanding justice, not as retribution, but as restoration. Not as punishment, but as healing." "Yes," Marcus whispered to the memory. And it all began with a simple choice to help two children on a rainy night. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Marcus turned back toward the light and warmth of the center, toward the family and community they had built together from the broken pieces of what came before. In that moment, he understood that true justice wasn't found in courtrooms or legal decisions, but in the thousand small choices we make each day to see beyond our wounds, to recognize our shared humanity, and to build something new from what has been broken. It was a lesson he would continue to share for the rest of his days, that sometimes, the most powerful response to injustice is not retribution, but the courage to create something better in its place. And that even in our darkest moments, unexpected light can find its way in, transforming not just our own lives, but the lives of generations to come. The story of Marcus Reeves and Judge Daniel Harrington reminds us that true healing often begins with the most unexpected encounters. It teaches us that justice is not just a verdict or a sentence, but a continuous process of acknowledging harm, making amends, and creating systems that honor the dignity of every human being. In a world often divided by blame and retribution, their journey offers a different possibility, that when we have the courage to face our failures honestly and the wisdom to transform them into opportunities for growth, we create ripples of healing that extend far beyond ourselves. For it is not in the absence of injustice that we find our greatest strength, but in how we respond to it. And sometimes, the most powerful response is to build bridges where walls once stood, to create connection where division once reigned, and to transform our deepest wounds into wellsprings of compassion and purpose. As you reflect on this story, perhaps you might consider your own opportunities for healing and transformation. For in the end, we all face moments of choice, to hold on to bitterness or to reach for something better, to remain defined by what has harmed us or to become architects of a more just and compassionate world. The choice, as Marcus discovered on that rainy night so many years ago, is always ours to make. If this story touched your heart or made you think differently about justice and redemption, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that illuminate the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to transform even our deepest wounds into sources of healing and hope.